Hello? Yeah, hello ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Conspiracy Crunch.
We are back. Hello.
Yep, we are indeed. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong... Yeah, is that better? Try talking again, Abby.
Hello.
Normal volume.
Hi.
Yeah. Oh,
You're
wow.
good.
You gotta give us a lot of sound clips of that one then. But yeah, we're all good. I was trying to change the mic by moving the comp, so that's like the music play out. So obviously that's not going to affect Abby's voice, but...
Oh, not really, no.
Nah, but
That
anyway...
doesn't work.
Anyway, welcome back to the Conspiracy Crunch. This is our first episode back after Christmas. We were going to have one last week, but I would find a nice excuse for you, but in truth, I just didn't have time to write any notes.
Yeah.
So we're back this week, and we've got some proper notes this week as well.
We do indeed, so we're all ready and prepared
Yeah.
this time.
If you don't follow us on social media, then I will fill you in on what today's subjects are. The first one is going to be Alfred Dreyfus and the Dreyfus Affair. We'll go in more detail into that in a sec. I mean, usually the subjects we pick have a link of some kind, but that's not the case today. There couldn't be any further apart in truth.
Yeah, we're mixing things up a little bit this time.
Yeah, and part 2 of the show is going to be How Did Tutankhamen Die and the Curse of His Tomb. It's actually just going to be How Did He Die, because I didn't get time to fit the curse bit in. We'll do it as a separate episode in the future, I guess. So yeah, How Did Tutankhamen Die and the Dreyfus Affair are today's, well, affairs, I guess.
Yeah. Right,
So,
should we get into it then?
Yeah, let's get into it. So the first one today is Alfred Dreyfus and the Dreyfus Affair. So, as always, we'll have a little bit of history to kick you off, then the big questions, and then we'll go into the bulk of the theory. Okay,
Let's
so
begin.
first of all, the history surrounding it is Alfred Dreyfus was a French artillery officer born in 1859 and served in the French military from 1880 until 1918. He was accused of being a spy by the French military and sentenced to life imprisonment in 1894. This sentence initially seemed like a correct decision, but would gradually unfold as one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in French history.
So, the big questions for today. Why was Alfred Dreyfus convicted? What is Devil's Island? And what happened while he was in prison?
Yeah, yes, we'll also look at, oh yeah, it's there anyway.
Yeah,
I was going to say we're going to
talk
look at
about
why
it.
was he convicted, but this is a top question. I've forgotten my own notes.
Well
Anyway, yeah, so why was he convicted? This is the shortest section of this part, but we'll go into it anyway. So in September 1894, a cleaner at the German embassy in Paris discovered a ripped up note in a bin. When the note was reassembled, it showed sensitive information about the movements and strategies of the French military. The French had known a leak in their security for some time, and Lieutenant Colonel Jean Sander knew first-hand artillery parts and blueprints of finding their way into German hands.
So Sander examined the note and observed the handwriting was vaguely similar to that of Alfred Dreyfus. The investigation was notably brief, and Dreyfus was arrested on suspicion of treason on the 15th of October 1894. On the 5th of January 1895, Dreyfus was formally convicted of treason in a secret martial court and stripped of his military ranks. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on the infamous Devil's Island.
Yeah, it's sort of already you can sort of start seeing a few issues arising from this case.
Yeah.
Sort of, first of all, the grounds he was convicted on are very turbulent. There's not really much evidence going against him, yet he somehow managed to find himself in prison for life.
Bit extreme.
Yeah, definitely. It's when I was doing the research for this, I was like, I was thinking, have you ever seen the film Count of Monte Cristo?
No.
No, I was thinking like, I kind of feel like that was partly inspired by this story, but we'll go on to that in a bit. So next we have Devil's Island, which, as Abby said just now, is infamous, a famous place in the world for all the wrong reasons.
It really is. It's brutal, as we'll go on to discuss now.
Yeah, so now known as Andaman Island, Devil's Island was a prison colony off the coast of French Guiana from 1852 to 1953. It is one of 3 islands in the so-called Salvation Islands. I think that's kind of an ironic name, considering the history that had. There's not much salvation going on those islands during their peak time. So all three of these islands were and still are owned by France and used by prison islands where convicts were sent to fulfill a life imprisonment of hard labour. During its 101 years of service, Devil's Island held 60,000 incarcerated men, but out of those 60,000, only 2,000 actually survived to the end of their sentences. Due to its low survival rate, Devil's Island was one of the most feared prisons in the world at its time and is still revered as one of history's most notorious prisons.
So, escaping from Devil's Island was almost impossible, and as few as 9 individuals managed to successfully flee the island. The first of which was French anarchist Clement Duval, who escaped in 1901 after spending 15 years on the island. Escaping was difficult due to the isolated location of the islands and the treacherous shark-infested waters which surrounded them. Sharks were drawn to the islands by the bodies of prisoners, which were disposed of off the coasts of the islands. On top of this, the heat made prisoners weaker, and it made it easier for them to contract fevers. Also, their diets mainly consisted of pork trimmings, so they had no nutrition and were borderline delirious. Devil's Island is now completely abandoned of native inhabitants and is a tourist location owned by the French government.
They'll turn anything into a tourist attraction, won't they?
I mean, to be fair, when I was reading the notes, I was thinking that would be a cool place to actually go and look at.
The history of it.
There is a lot of history there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's photos of it now. Like, most of the actual prison buildings are derelict, and like the roofs have caved in, and like nature's reclaimed what was it originally. It's sort of one of those like urban decay kind of examples, I guess, but with a very haunting history.
Definitely.
But yeah, and sort of the fact that the first person to escape was in 1901. And it was opened in 1852, kind of shows how hard it took almost 50 years for someone to actually escape. And what I've not mentioned in the notes is out of those 9 people that escaped, 4 of them actually escaped together.
Oh.
So, yeah, that guy, Clement Duval, he fled to the United States and actually wrote a book about his experience on Devil's Island and how he escaped. Which I think would be really interesting to read, actually.
That would be a good thing to read.
Yeah.
So if you guys are interested in Clement Duval,
how
he escaped and that, go read it.
Yeah, if you get hooked by the infamy of Devil's Island, then do definitely try and find that book. I think some of the other escapees wrote books as well. I believe maybe Alfred Dreyfus may have written one himself, actually, but I'm not sure. Anyway. So we're going to move on now to, this is one of the most crucial figures in the story. He was a really important guy, and his work in this sort of was a big turning point in the justice of Alfred Dreyfus and also the justice system of France as a whole. So this is Lieutenant Colonel Georges Picquart. That's with a Q. Don't get excited, Star Trek fans.
Aww.
There's a Picard later, so you can get hyped for him. But in 1890, I keep wanting to say 1986.
Oh yeah, I do that a lot.
Yeah, I was hoping I wouldn't do that, but I mean, if it was 1986, it's probably a bit late. But in 1896, Georges Picquart was named the new head of French intelligence as
We're having brilliant
let's pretend I'm just about to start that sentence. In 1896, Georges Picquart was named the new head of French intelligence, and soon after taking his position in office, he became aware of the whole surrounding the evidence against Dreyfus. When he delved into his own independent research into the case, he discovered the real culprit was a man named Ferdinand Walsin Esterhazy, an army major in the French military. So the reason he had to do it independently is that he couldn't conduct research against his own intelligence service on record.
No,
because
that'd
people
be very bad for him.
Yeah, he would be the sort of person that would magically disappear in the night and never be seen again. So when Picquart took the evidence to his superiors in the military in 1896, the evidence was suppressed immediately. However, Esterhazy was put on trial in private military court, but was unanimously acquitted after just 2 days. Considering this is a treason charge, a 2-day court trial is like ridiculously short.
Basically nothing.
Yeah, it's like a football match lasting 3 minutes. It would just be ridiculous. It would just be pointless. But following the completion of the trial, additional evidence against Dreyfus is discovered and additional charges are piled on top of him, which I think is quite harsh considering he was already in prison for life.
Yeah.
An extra 10 years is a little bit overkill. But also, Picard was restationed in South Tunisia to keep him out of the way and stop him from investigating the case any further.
I mean, at least he didn't disappear.
Yeah, he didn't disappear entirely. It was just like, but he was still the head of intelligence. So that must have been a really turbulent time for French intelligence.
Yeah,
like,
it really must
I've
have
got
been.
this really important note I need to get to France. I'll just give it 5 days to get to Tunisia by boat.
It's mental.
Yeah.
However, suppressing the information like this had no effect on suppressing the case as a whole, because it had become public knowledge and the members of the public were rallying in support of Dreyfus. On top of this, Dreyfus's family remained convicted of his innocence and rallied President of the French Senate, Auguste Scherer-Kessner, to study the evidence against Alfred. By October 1897, Scherer-Kessner was convicted of Dreyfus's innocence and joined the rally to have him retrialed. In the following months, the additional documents against Dreyfus were proved to be fake and forged by the head members of the military's intelligence sector. Simultaneously, a novelist named Emily Zola was rallying support for Dreyfus through newspaper articles to great success. Following the massive support for Dreyfus across the nation, France was forced to return Dreyfus to the mainland in 1899 for a second trial.
Yeah, this is the bit where it starts to get interesting for Dreyfus. Like he was very down on luck initially. I mentioned that on Devil's Island earlier, they were basically fed off of pork trimmings. Dreyfus was given especially harsh treatment on the island. He was kept... It was a hard labour island. He wasn't forced to do hard labour. He was just left in solitary confinement, pretty much all day, every day.
That'd be a lot harder on someone mentally and physically.
Yeah, and you think the heat in the island as well, like French Guiana is a very hot place, and then you've got that heat constantly by yourself in a small compact room. When he was writing about this in the future, he mentioned that his clothes were always damp from sweat. They never dried because it was so hot and because he was in such a small stuffy room.
Ugh.
And also when the officers, the pork trimmings he got would be rancid, so he had to eat rancid pork for 5 years. That's all he ate, so it's no wonder that he was getting a little bit delirious towards the end of it. Surprised he even lived that long.
I know.
It's crazy, but yeah, it's Oh, I nearly skipped past that bit. This is an important part. Yeah. In 1898, Ferdinand Ralston Esterhazy, the man who actually was the spy, retired from his position in the military and fled to England seeking political asylum until his death in 1923. It was conveniently timed on his part.
Yeah, so if you think about it, he basically got away with it.
Yeah, he did get away with it, essentially. I mean, there is only one big saving grace for that, and we'll get back to that later. But, I mean, other than the fact Esterhazy is remembered as a spy, that's pretty much the first saving grace of this. Knowing that he actually did do it is kind of what stops him from getting away with it so much, I guess.
Yeah.
But, he essentially got away with it at the time. But, in 1899, Alfred Dreyfus was the biggest name in France, and every person in the country was picking a side in support of Dreyfus, or a group of activists now known by historians as the Dreyfusards. It's a mouthful, that one.
It is, just a little bit.
It gets even worse with the counter-argument.
Just
Among Dreyfus were famous French figures such as novelist and poet Anatole France, stage actress Sarah Bernhardt, and the future French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau, who would actually come to fame by being the French Prime Minister during World War I, and would earn his nickname of the Tiger due to the harsh sanctions that he pushed against Germany at the end of the war. But that's a history lesson for another day. In the opposite corner of these people were the so-called anti-Dreyfusards, which is even harder to say, who had notably less famous supporters, with the exception of publisher Edward Drummond. I mean, have you ever heard of him?
I recognise the name, yes.
To be honest, I've never heard of him. I was doing this research. I was like, oh, apparently he's famous according to the websites about Alfred Dreyfus, Dreyfus even. Yeah, so that's sort of the battle lines that are being drawn. Obviously, from the lines like Georges Clemenceau, first of all, there, and the novelist and the poet Anatole France, you can see that it was this is sort of the first moment in French politics where liberalism took like a really huge stride forward.
Yeah,
this was like one of the big pivotal cases, and it really sort of launched Georges Clemenceau into politics as well, because at the time he was just a journalist, I believe. Or a journalist / newspaper correspondent. They're kind of the same thing, aren't they? A journalist and a newspaper correspondent.
I can imagine that the people that do them jobs would probably argue against that, but they are pretty similar.
But I mean, speaking as a journalist, they're pretty much the same thing, depending what journalism you do. But yeah, so they were sort of the lines. It's worth mentioning that Edward Drummond, the publisher, at the time he was the chief editor of a newspaper, and he used that to rally against Dreyfusards with articles.
If you've got the means to do so,
yeah,
you're going to do so.
I mean, I find that so hard to believe. A newspaper editor using his platform to push his own personal agenda. Never hear that happening, do you? Yeah, anyway, let's move on before we get in trouble.
So, in the second trial, new evidence supporting Dreyfus's innocence was presented to the court, but it did not matter, as he was once again found guilty and sentenced to a 10-year prison sentence, which he would serve in mainland France, sparing him a return to the dreaded Devil's Island. However, this sentence was quickly overruled and Dreyfus was pardoned of any additional charges held against him. Finally, in 1906, Dreyfus was exonerated of all previous charges after at last being found not guilty of espionage and treason. He was reinstated as a major in the French army the same year and served for the military throughout the entirety of World War I. He retired at the end of World War I with the rank of lieutenant colonel and died peacefully in 1935, aged 75.
So it had a happy ending.
Yeah.
Good for him. I mean, the only saving grace I was mentioning is it's worth mentioning that Dreyfus outlived Esterhazy quite considerably.
Yeah.
Which I think is going to be the saving grace. Like, he outlived him by over a decade. And Dreyfus is also featured on the front cover of Vanity magazine in 1899. Which is a nice little trivia thing for you that I discovered doing the research. The great thing about Vanity Fair at that point is because photography hadn't been a thing for that long, they still had they did the covers by portrait. So they painted him and then they reprinted the portrait.
Okay, that is cool.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's sort of it really went full circle for him. It worked out okay. What I find amazing about that is after the military basically shafted him for doing nothing, he then rejoins the military and fights in what at the time was the most brutal war in human history.
Yeah, he really stuck it.
He doesn't just fight in it; he survives it. The whole thing. It's crazy.
It is.
It's meant to be, I guess you could say. But yeah, it's a real sort of good underdog, a good comeback story, I guess. He did good.
He got plenty of support and he managed to get through it with a win at that.
So yeah, of course this shows that he was obviously set up. But the question that a lot of people will probably be asking is, but why was he set up? What did the French military gain by falsely accusing him of espionage while the actual spy continued to get information out of France?
Yeah,
so
the reason is not nice.
No, it's really awful. But yeah, it's obvious that there was a conspiracy against Alfred Dreyfus from the very beginning of the entire affair. But the reason why is a lot simpler than you may think. It boils down to religion, basically. Like, I wish there was a less blunt way to put that, but that's the bottom line of this one, basically. In 1894, France was a devoted Catholic nation, and in some respects it still is today. However, what has changed is France's attitude towards other religions, and they are much more accepting now than they were back in 1894. Like we mentioned, like the turn of the 20th century, sort of a time where France was going through its first real push of liberal, like a new liberal phase, I guess. Not the first one, obviously, because France has got a long history of revolts and Renaissance and things like that. But like this term was like a real big push in their history. So Alfred Dreyfus was of Jewish faith and ancestry, and this seems to be why he was set up for crimes he did not commit. An early example of why he was set up. Well, I feel like this is basically the seed of the whole thing. This is where it started. In 1892, when Dreyfus was completing his War College examination, he was expected to do extremely well by his friends, family, and other colleagues who had been mapping his progress. However, the examiner, General Bonifond, intentionally gave Dreyfus worse marks and defended his decision by doing so, saying, and I quote, "Jews were not desired on the staff." He basically stopped him from becoming a member of the War College because he didn't like Jewish people. Which is,
it was honestly disgusting.
Yeah, shameful. I mean, Dreyfus was obviously outraged by this. I mean, why wouldn't you be?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he had every right to be outraged. And Dreyfus actually discovered that another Jewish candidate, Lieutenant Picard, here he is, Star Trek fans, here's Mr. Picard, who had also suffered gravely because of his faith, and the two attempted to press charges against the school, specifically the examiner. When the school director discovered this information, he said he regretted what had happened, but was powerless to do anything.
If you think about it, the school director.
Yeah, if anyone can do it, he's the school director. He can fire and hire whoever he wants.
But he can't change the grades of someone.
At least give them a chance to at least give them a chance to resit the exams. A bit that I've not put in the notes is General Bonifond actually mentioned in his report. Excuse me. That cup of tea repeating on me.
Oh no, we didn't need to.
But yeah. So one of the things that General Bonifond put in his notes about Dreyfus was that he was a really good soldier with great discipline, but he didn't like some of his personality traits. So he's basically like, he's a really good soldier, but you could be the best soldier in the world. I'm just not hiring you because of your religion. Was basically what Bonifond was going by. I couldn't find out what the fate of General Bonifond was, but I like to think he got blown up by a landmine in World War One.
Jeez.
But yeah, there's no sort of records on him or what he did after this. But yeah, I like to think he had a horrible, miserable life afterwards. It's what he deserves. But Jerry, do you want to read the next bit?
Yeah. The French army at the time had 300 Jewish officers, but General Bonifond did not want there to be any more than that, which is why he essentially disqualified Picard and Dreyfus from high positions in the War Office. Dreyfus's criticism on the War Office in the 2 years that followed meant that he had to be set up as the scapegoat for spying and silence his claims of anti-Semitism in the process.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
That's sort of the French government set up Dreyfus because Dreyfus was calling out the French government for being anti-Semitic. It's like he did literally nothing wrong. It's crazy, and it is
honestly.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, this is one of the biggest miscarriages of justice ever. Not just in French history, like world history. There's only a few examples of like something as extreme as this happening. Like the only example in Britain I can think of that was similar is have you heard of the Birmingham Six?
No.
No, it happened during the IRA war. 6 Irish people were in Birmingham for a funeral, and a bomb got set off, and these 6 Irish guys basically got arrested on the spot. And then the police beat confessions out of them.
Jeez.
And then they spent, I think, 13 years in prison before it turned out that they actually didn't do it. There was a huge Channel 4 documentary about it while they were still in prison. And then later on as well, it's considered the biggest miscarriage of justice, the biggest miscarriage of justice in modern British history. But we might do a full episode on that actually.
Yeah, I'd actually.
That'd be a really interesting one. Yeah, because we've not really done any sort of British related ones yet, have we?
No, I don't think we really have.
I can't think of one. No.
We'll think of something to do for you guys.
Yeah, we'll do a British one, but that won't be the next one. Yeah, there's no real natural link into this next point. I mean, France is a country. Egypt is also a country. There's your link.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a link.
They're both countries. But that's pretty much the only parallel between these two cases. The next one is, of course, how did Tutankhamen die? I was going to about the curse of his tomb. I'm having a field day today.
You really are.
But yeah, we were going to talk about the curse of his tomb. But once I had actually done all of the notes about how he died, I was already up to 3 pages and over 1,000 words. So I thought, let's just leave it.
Yeah.
I thought I'd leave the curse of his tomb for like a separate one, maybe in a couple of weeks, because this is already the second Egyptian one we've done. So
Yeah, true.
I might leave it for a bit. Well, technically the third, because Atlantis was tied to ancient Egypt.
Yeah, a little bit.
So
yeah.
like 2.5 Egyptian ones,
Okay,
we'll
we'll
say.
go with 2.5.
Do you want to do the history of this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the history of it is Tutankhamun became pharaoh of Egypt aged 9 in the year 1332 BC, so roughly 3,300 years ago. Tutankhamun's father,
Akhenaten.
Akhenaten, caused turbulence during his reign as pharaoh by moving Egypt's capital city, changing Egypt's chief god from Amun, the god of sun, to Aten, the disk of the sun. Both of these gods make up spectral aspects of Ra, the true god of sun in ancient Egyptian teachings. He also shifted religious powers into his own hands, meaning Tutankhamun's reign was mainly focused around undoing all the chaos his father had caused. However, in 1323 BC, just as Tutankhamun was turning 19, he suddenly died, leaving a power vacuum as he had no sons. Because of this, he was succeeded by his chief advisor A.
Yeah, A. This AY.
There is plenty of evidence to suggest that Tutankhamun's death was sudden and unexpected, which leads people to a number of conclusions surrounding the cause of his demise. Following the discovery of his tomb in 1922 by a team of archaeologists, led by Howard Carter, made Tutankhamun a relative footnote in ancient Egyptian history, one of its most famous yet mysterious rulers of all time.
Yeah, so it's important to remember following that at the time in ancient Egypt, Tutankhamun wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
He was only pharaoh for 9 years.
So just like, nah, not
yeah.
important.
Yeah, he's like, we'll go on to sort of the details of that more later. But yeah, he was only pharaoh for 9 years. He was a relatively small part of Egyptian history, but because of his discovery in the Valley of the Kings, his tomb was basically the only one that was still fully intact when archaeologists discovered it, which is why he's so famous now. But I mean, talk about reaching the height of fame after your peak.
Yeah, I know, right?
3,000 years later. But yeah, so the big questions we've got to ask here are, first of all, was Tutankhamun murdered?
Dun dun dun.
It's very plausible that could have
yeah.
happened. Do you think like how sudden it was, and like how his chief advisor was the one that took his place afterwards is also very suspicious. Another theory we're going to be looking at is did Tutankhamun die in a chariot accident? There's more evidence to support that later on. And what health issues did Tutankhamun have to face? There are theories that his conditions and health issues may have instigated his death and influenced it in certain ways. We'll look at that as well. And we won't do what is the curse of King Tut, so I'll just give that a little highlight and goodbye.
Get rid of it. It never happened.
Yeah, that
Don't
was
worry.
there. It's gone. A cover up and a cover up. It never existed. But so first of all, we'll do. I mean, it's all very well talking about the deaths, but first of all, we've got to look at the evidence that Tutankhamun died an unexpected death, and there's actually quite a lot, which I was actually unaware of. I thought that people may have. You'd think the ancient Egyptians would have some sort of system in place to sort of ensure that, like, worst case scenario, they had something in place, but they didn't for this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anyway, usually when a pharaoh died in ancient Egypt, he was lavish with a large tomb that was hand painted by servants, showing their great achievements in their lives from floor to the ceiling, as well as showing like pictures of gods as well. They also had a tailor-made funerary mask and sarcophagus, as pharaohs are essentially viewed as gods amongst men in ancient Egypt. However, this is not the case for King Tut. His funerary mask was not made to the correct measurements and had to be glued to his body with an adhesive paste to hold it in place. This was discovered when Howard Carter found his tomb and they couldn't remove the mask, and they found like elements of like early primitive glue basically around the mask. His sarcophagus is also far too big for him and not measured for him at all, showing that both the mask and sarcophagus had been meant for somebody else.
So on top of this, Tutankhamun's tomb was uncharacteristically small compared to the tombs of the pharaohs that had been discovered both before and since. In fact, King Tut's tomb was one of the smallest to have ever been discovered that belonged to a pharaoh. This shows that the tomb was either not finished and still needed some more stone carving out before it was due to be used, or it was meant for someone of less importance compared to the pharaoh. All of King Tut's possessions were crammed into the small room next to his sarcophagus before it was sealed and left untouched for over 3,000 years. When discovered, the room was crammed full of possessions including tables, chairs, jewellery and even dismantled chariots. Given the nature of how all the items were jumbled in, it seems that they were put in quickly and were expected to have been given much more room.
Yeah, so like other tombs that have been found, I mean, there's actually very few pharaoh tombs that have been found fully intact with all of the riches in, because like tomb raiders and stuff.
People go in and steal all the
tomb
stuff,
raiders, grave robbers, they've all been in there. They've had plenty of time to do it as well. You think it's been 3,000 years since Tutankhamen died. It's a miracle that, I think the reason no one discovered it is because of how small it was.
Yeah, if you expect when you're looking for pharaoh's tombs, you expect to find something a lot bigger.
Yeah, did you know, little known fact, there's actually very few pharaohs that were buried in pyramids.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of them were buried in the Valley of the Kings.
I did know that for once, actually. I know quite a bit about ancient Egypt. So,
Yes, common misconception that people think King Tut's tomb was found inside a pyramid. It wasn't. It was found in the Valley of the Kings, alongside most other sarcophaguses that have been discovered. But, yeah. So the final point that proved King Tut died suddenly again refers to the paintings on the wall. Through forensic analysis, it has been identified that paintings are speckled with 3,000-year-old drying mould. It was caused by the paint being applied to wet backing plaster, which allowed the mould to come through, showing that the paintings are rushed and completed as quickly as possible. For other pharaohs, paintings are far more elaborate, and painters spent weeks, even months, preparing the tombs. So again, this shows...
they really weren't expecting him to have died when he did.
No, it's very sudden. So, like, you think the pharaohs died suddenly. They've got this small tomb that's either unfinished or meant for, like, an advisor or something.
They've gone, sod it, shove him in there quick.
Yeah, so they've gone to the painters quickly, get in there, put the plaster up, didn't even wait for the plaster to dry, painted over it, which caused the mould to come through. And then they just got all of his possessions, which are obviously meant for much bigger room, and just crammed as much in as they could. Like, if you've seen pictures of King Tutankhamun's tomb when it was discovered, it looks like a boot sale.
Yeah, it really does.
There's just stuff all over the place.
Such a mess.
Yeah, there's the tomb's so small that when they put the chariots in, they actually had to dismantle them to put them in. They had to take like the arms that hold the horses. I can't remember what they're called, but like the bits at the front of the chariots. Yeah, and also the wheels had to come off as well to actually fit the chariots in. We'll talk about more of that. Well, right now actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did Tutankhamun die in a chariot crash? Is this one of the predominant theories until we get to the end, which we're just going to completely destroy it. But wait for that.
We're going to tear it to pieces.
Yeah, as we do with most theories on the show, I've got to be honest.
Yeah.
Especially the Philadelphia experiment. That one got it a bit hard.
That one was everywhere.
Yeah. Anyway, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb immediately had archaeologists asking questions about the young pharaoh's demise and why he was buried in such a manner. These questions became even more predominant when the possessions of the king left in a tomb were examined more closely. Tutankhamun's tomb includes as many as 6 dismantled chariots, showing that the pharaoh was most likely a fond chariot driver. It is unlikely that he was a chariot racer, as pharaohs, as we mentioned earlier, were seen as gods amongst men, and chariot racing could be quite dangerous and probably too much of a risk for someone of such high importance. So the sudden death of Tutankhamun may have come about in a chariot crash when he was just casually riding by himself.
So yeah, like I said, want to be cocky, look at me.
Yeah, splat. Yeah, but yeah, he wouldn't have been allowed to do... You would think he wouldn't be allowed to do proper chariot races, given how risky and dangerous they were.
Oh no,
they wouldn't let the most important person in Egypt, the most important person probably in the world at that point, do something like a chariot race and risk their health.
Oh no, it wouldn't have happened.
No. Do you want to do the next bit?
Yeah, sorry. Evidence in favour of this is First of all, his clear fondness for chariots. Secondly, a full-body X-ray of Tut's body in 1968 showed a number of fractures all over his body. The majority of these were put down to general decay or the body being damaged through transportation upon its initial discovery. A number of bones were also broken when the funerary mask was removed. However, only one bone break has been proven to have happened before Tut's death. And judging by the lack of healing evidence surrounding the break, it looks like it may have happened just days before the pharaoh died. This is a large break just above King Tut's left knee, almost at the base of his thigh bone. This is the strongest bone in the human body, so it takes a lot of pressure and force to break. But replica of Tut's chariot was built and could reach speeds of upwards of 25 miles per hour, which, if he had fallen off at this speed, would have been more than enough force to break his thigh bone. The chances of him dying directly from the chariot crash are minimal, but the broken thigh bone could have been infected, and with ancient Egypt's lack of developed antibiotics and medicines, that could have ended up being the cause of his death.
Yeah, so you think if it's like an open wound bone break on your leg, like that, they hadn't discovered antibiotics yet. They didn't really have any sort of medical drugs to help. You're pretty much done for at that point. So that's a popular theory. And also, they built a replica of, like you mentioned, of one of King Tut's chariots. And that was done on the BBC documentary, actually. It's on YouTube if you want to check it out. It's really interesting. That's actually where I got some of this information from. But yeah, it is really interesting. We'll talk about the X-ray from 1968 on the next theory about Tutankhamun's death. But before we get to that, we'll talk about exactly why he couldn't have died in a chariot crash. So all of this is countered by a recent MRI scan which took place as part of a BBC documentary in 2015. This is the same documentary I just referenced, talking about the chariot replica. This MRI scan had a surprising outcome. It turns out that from the scan, King Tut had a club foot and crooked ankle.
Ooh.
So yeah, he basically couldn't put his foot flat on the floor, and his two biggest toes were sort of in complete opposite direction to the rest. So he had like a deformed foot basically, and he couldn't put pressure on it. As if that wasn't bad enough, he also suffered from a debilitating bone condition in the same foot, which essentially caused some of the bones around the base of his toes to die and become unresponsive. So this means it would have been impossible for King Tut to put pressure on his foot and walk at all, because the pain in his foot would have been honestly unbearable.
I can imagine so, with no like painkillers or anything in that time, so it'd be immense.
They also found in Tutankhamun's tomb, I think they said they found over 20 variations of walking canes and walking sticks, so that shows how dependent he was on his canes and sticks for mobility. Because of this, it's unlikely he would have even been able to get in a chariot, let alone ride one.
Yeah, with the amount of pain, you've got no chance. So
yeah, because like steering a chariot is done like on where you like put your centre of gravity basically. So if you've only got one foot, you won't be able to steer. So it
have little chance.
Yeah, it's extremely unlikely.
So that more and more rules out the fact that he maybe died in a chariot crash.
Yeah, I mean, unless he was a complete idiot and decided to try and ride a chariot with a club foot. I feel like his advisors probably would have stepped in at that point. But
I mean, it would have been pretty funny to see.
But yeah, you think I'd like to think his advisors had the common sense to stop him from trying to ride a chariot with a club foot and crooked ankle.
What's better to think of as a young King Tut screaming at them and saying, "No, let me go. I am doing this."
What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, what is it? I wonder.
3,000 years later. But so the next theory we're going to look at is that we can more or less rule out the idea that he was killed in a chariot crash. The next one is, was Tutankhamun murdered?
Dun dun dun.
Do you want to kick this one off?
I will indeed. This has been a popular theory floating around online among historians for decades. The idea of Tut being murdered comes from his chief advisor, taking the position of pharaoh after Tut's death.
Yeah, so like we mentioned earlier, like his chief advisor was the person that succeeded him because Tutankhamun had no sons or even children. There is evidence that his wife was pregnant with daughters, but they were both miscarried, which is sad.
It is indeed.
Yeah, so he had no living heirs, which is what caused such a power vacuum at the top of... It's very rare in Egyptian history to find such a power vacuum that high up the pyramid, excuse the pun. But
oh my god, that's such a terrible pun. No.
I thought of the word pyramid before it even occurred to me that it could be a pun. I was like, I've got to say it now.
Clap, clap.
So, yeah.
So, again, sorry.
Yeah, alright, okay.
You doing it?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Right.
Yeah. Again, referring to the 1968 X-ray from earlier, which we mentioned about the foot. This theory started gaining traction when the X-ray of King Tut's head showed bone fragments loose inside his skull, which some experts proved as evidence of him being killed with a blunt weapon. So, like, the idea is he got hit over the head, fractured his skull, dead.
Yeah.
But then, of course, that doesn't answer the question of why he had a broken... Is it your femur? Your thigh bone?
It's one of them.
I don't know.
Yes,
I know tibia is your shin. But I can't... Yeah, your thigh bone. We'll just say your thigh bone.
Hold on, I want to know what it is now. Do you want to continue reading and I will interrupt?
All right. So the king of the idea of King Tut being murdered by his advisors does make sense in a lot of ways. A had been the chief advisor to King Tut, as we mentioned. All the time he was too young to rule independently, meaning that I was basically the king himself. Then, just as the young king reaches the age of maturity, A kills him to maintain the power he has had over the past 9 years. It makes sense that he would do that, to be honest. Sort of like you've had the power and you've had like the king in the palm of your hand for almost a decade. And then he gets the age of maturity and you get used to the power, so you off him so you can keep it.
Just to put in a side note, it was the femur.
Hey.
You were right.
Hey. Yeah, I never had any doubts.
Sure.
But sadly, there is very little historical evidence remaining that can help us understand A's descent to the Pharaoh, as documents were intentionally destroyed by the ancient Egyptians. This is because they wanted to wipe out Akhenaten, who was King Tutankhamun's dad, from history, which meant it also had to wipe out King Tut and A from history as well. Because both of them were closely related to the king. A was also the chief advisor for Akhenaten, and then also he was the chief advisor of King Tut as well. So he had to be wiped from history, as well as a lot of stuff surrounding Tutankhamun also. Yeah. There is... Try that again. Yeah. However, whatever documents that are left, the very few amounts of them, do show that A was a power-hungry individual. The chief of the Egyptian army, Horemheb, was meant to succeed Tutankhamun as Pharaoh of Egypt, but A managed to outmaneuver him and claim the throne for himself.
Then documents discovered in the ruins of
Hittite Empire.
Of the Hittite Empire, a northern region of ancient Egypt, show further evidence of A's thirst for power. A series of letters discovered documents how an Egyptian queen wrote to King... Oh, jeez.
There's a lot of...
I'm not good with long names.
There's a lot of long names in this one. Egyptian queen wrote to King Suppiluliani.
Yes, something like that.
Have that.
Of the Hittite Empire, saying that her husband had died and she had no sons. This correlated with the death of King Tut when the Hittite king sent one of his sons to marry the queen. They were suspiciously killed during their travels. Just weeks later, A married the widow of Tutankhamun, Ankhesemen, and strengthened his claim to the throne. Historians think these letters show that A murdered the northern prince and married Tut's widow instead so he could strengthen his claim to the throne.
Yeah, so not only does he kill him, but he marries his wife afterwards. Talk about rubbing salt into the wounds.
No, right.
I mean, not that Tut was around to see him marry his wife, but damn, that's a pretty cold turn of events there. But yeah, you've got to think there must have been quite an age gap.
Oh yeah, there would have
between A
been.
and Ankhesemen. Because A was the chief advisor for Tutankhamun's dad.
Oh yeah, there definitely will
yeah.
be a large age gap, but I don't think that's particularly like not normal.
Yeah, it wasn't uncommon at that point. Yeah, but I mean, life expectancy was a lot lower back then. So you sort of think that the oldest they would have made it to then was what, 50?
Yeah,
55?
Something about that, yeah.
So you got to think,
If
hey, maybe
that.
he didn't have long left at that point, because he's got to be mid-40s at that point, surely. But, yeah, anyway. Yeah, further examination of the bone fragments in Tutankhamun's skull shows that they were actually made by the embalmers after King Tut's death and were not related to his death at all. This is proved by the formation of the resin around the bones. Basically, I can't remember which way around it is, but it's basically the bone fragments were mixed in with the resin of the embalming fluid, which shows that they were made present afterwards, as they were like flushed in by the embalming fluid.
How do you mess up that badly?
I don't know. You think as an embalmer, you've got one job.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same job on multiple areas, but you get my point. Yeah, because it's actually a myth that they got your brain out through your nose. That's a myth. They went through the back of the head instead.
That just ruins horrible histories.
Yeah, it does. But yeah, that was actually not true at all. They didn't.
That's actually sad.
Yeah, they didn't put a stick up your nose to get your brain out. They actually just like hit your head open with a mallet or something. But yeah, anyway, before we get too gruesome, however, this just proves he wasn't killed by a blow to the head, and chances he could still have been killed by another way. So it just proves that he wasn't killed by a blunt weapon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to kill a pharaoh, especially if you're a chief advisor, you probably find a more subtle way to do it.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to go do something that would be extremely, like, obvious.
Yeah,
and
it's
right
obvious
in your
that he had
face.
been murdered at that point. The leg break is also certainly linked to King Tut's death somehow. My personal theory on this is... my personal theory is that maybe A had like pushed him down a flight of stairs or something.
I was just about to say that.
But you think it would be... Well, you think Tutankhamun is dependent on walking sticks. Maybe he fell down the flight of stairs himself, like he lost his balance underneath his walking sticks and fell down the stairs himself, breaking his leg.
I mean, if someone pushed him, that would be a very good cover.
Yeah, there's not really a lot Tut could have done about it either, really.
No.
I mean, he's completely dependent on his canes, and if one of them went out from underneath him, he would have no chance, really. But like we said just now, if you're going to kill a pharaoh who were like gods amongst men, they weren't just seen as kings; they were seen as like gods, like otherworldly beings. And so to straight out murder one would be it would be unthinkable. Like, imagine sort of assassinating JFK times 100.
Yeah.
That's kind of what
really
killing a pharaoh would be like. But, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Have I gone too far? No,
you're good.
Yeah, we're good.
So,
I thought I scrolled too far past.
So there are a few alternative theories as well as the ones we talked about. So recent studies by scientists suggest that King Tut suffered from epilepsy, which may have caused him to break his leg during one of his more severe seizures. However, this idea is still viewed as being controversial, and the main evidence to support this comes from documents of visions that Tut's father and great-grandfather both had.
So, basically, I'll elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Basically, Tutankhamun's great-grandfather was the person who was initially responsible for removing the sand from the Sphinx. And basically, while he was out for a ride, he leant down by the Sphinx for a sleep, and in his dreams he said he had a vision where the Sphinx was talking to him, and it said, "If you remove the sand from me, I'll make you pharaoh." So naturally he removes all the sand, and lo and behold, he became pharaoh. There's now like a giant plaque, I guess, or a tome in between the feet of the Sphinx in hieroglyphics illustrating this story.
That is cool.
Yeah, and then on top of that, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's father, was... he also had a similar vision, which is why he changed the god and also the capital city. He actually built the capital city. The new capital city was built under his command. And the reason he did that is because he said he got a vision from Amun. Yeah, was that the right one? I just want to make sure I got that the right way around. Where is it?
Further up.
Yeah. It was Aten, sorry.
Aten.
Yeah, Amun was the one that used to be the god, and then Aten was the one that Akhenaten changed it to. So many names beginning with A, it's so confusing. Yeah, but
Oh,
yeah.
they like to have confusing names.
Yeah.
That's what makes it more fun.
Yeah.
Let's see how many you can remember.
But yeah, basically Akhenaten had a vision in his sleep from the god Aten that said, you need to make me the main god when you become pharaoh, and also you need to move the capital city to this location. Visions are in documented in history and documentation currently as well, visions can be related to severe forms of epilepsy. So there is an idea that they were both epileptic, and these visions that they had were a result of that. Unless, of course, you actually believe in Egyptian mythology, in which case the gods actually did talk to them.
Like that, considering his, in this case, his grandfather had a vision and then became pharaoh, as he was told in that vision he would.
Yeah.
You're gonna believe whatever the vision's saying.
Yeah, anything past it.
Yeah.
You've also got to think that they didn't have as much nowhere near the medical advancement that we have now. Like the thought of epilepsy being a thing was probably not even considered. But the other theory that we've got on here is one other theory suggests that Tutankhamen broke his leg and then contracted a deadly disease due to having a weak immune system. So again, that doesn't tell us why he broke his leg, but it tells us why the leg break killed him. His immune system was weaker because he was actually a product of incest, as was proven in a DNA test on him. His mother and father were also brother and sister. Ancient Egyptian royalty thought having children with non-royal people would weaken their bloodline and make them less divine. So it caused King Tutankhamun to have a weaker immune system, as he was a product of incest. And it also caused him to have bone conditions and a host of other health issues, like the clubfoot, for example.
If you think through most ancient Egyptian history with pharaohs and that, a lot of them were married off to the cousins and stuff like that. So
because it was a big thing.
It is viable.
It's awful, but there's also there's so much strange stuff about King Tutankhamun's family. Really odd.
It's ancient Egypt.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say, really.
If you could sum up ancient Egypt in one word, it would just be odd. There's so much that we don't know and we'll never know.
I could probably think of stronger words, but I might get told off.
Don't.
Yeah, let's not.
But the thing with ancient Egypt is there's so much that we will never know now because it was so long ago. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure you do go and check out our episode on the secret Sphinx room, because that was fascinating. That's one of my favourite ones that we've done so far. That was really interesting.
Especially if you do enjoy ancient Egyptian theories and history and everything. Definitely go check it out.
Yeah, it's great. But that's the end of the episode, basically.
Yeah, we just got to the end of it there.
Yeah, so that's your lot. To start off with, we had the Dreyfus Affair, which is, it's not really as much of a conspiracy now because it's been solved, but it is still very interesting.
Oh yeah, I definitely enjoyed that one.
Yeah, and
I think that was my favourite one from this episode.
Yeah, you prefer it to King Tutankhamen?
Just a little bit.
Ooh, interesting.
I'm already
it's
in
more
ancient
topical, isn't
Egypt.
it?
No, so learning something new is always more fun.
Yeah. But it's more topical, isn't it?
Yeah, just a bit. And it links back to other stuff we've done, so...
Yeah, I like the ones that we do
again.
which are sort of more offbeat, the ones that aren't as famous. Steady.
Just nearly throwing my drink about that. It's not a good idea, guys.
Don't do that. But,
yes.
I like the ones that were offbeat, like the Rohan Codex one was really good.
Yeah, that was.
Were you here for that one, or was that the one you missed?
I can't remember. I think that might be the one I missed.
Yeah, but the Rohan Codex, that's episode